another episode of the Point of Order podcast, an inside look at California politics and the state legislature. I am your host, Assemblyman Josh Hoover, and I'm joined again today by Chris Micheli, who is a lobbyist with Snodgrass and Micheli firm. He's an adjunct professor at McGeorge School of Law and an author of a number of books about the legislature. Welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Thanks for having me back, Assemblyman. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed our conversation last time and look forward to picking your brain today.
Okay.
About some of the stuff that's going on. How's everything? How are you feeling this year? By the way, last week we quoted your tweet about the number of bills, right?
Yeah.
I think somewhere in the 2,100 range.
2,142,
yeah. Right? Yeah. So always appreciate those statistics
for
the podcast. But how are you feeling about this legislative session? What do you think are some of your predictions or some of the issues that we're going to focus most on this year besides, well, I guess the budget would be one probably.
Yeah, I mean, I think the budget overlays a little bit of everything. As I noted in my annual recap of bill introductions and all, the second year of the 2-year session, and this year no different. We had over 2,600 bills in the first year, 2,100 this year. The second year of the 2-year session is always fewer bills. If you look 2-3 decades back, that's always been the case. And as you know, by the Constitution, with a few exceptions, you generally adjourn August 31st, so you do a little shorter period, obviously in the second and final year of the session. So we do have a few fewer bills, not a ton. But I think things like, retail theft is going to be a hot topic. Artificial intelligence, it seems like everybody's got a bill on AI.
It's like 30 bills on AI this year.
Yes. I think you have to start with what is artificial intelligence.
Right.
That was part of the topic of last week's first hearing of the Assembly Privacy and Consumer Protection Committee.
Yeah, I was in that hearing. I think I saw you in there too, hanging out. I thought it was a really interesting hearing, actually. I thought it was a really good starting point for the discussion of like what is AI when we talk about AI? What are all the differences between the, types of technology that we're actually talking about? And I thought it was a good start.
Yeah, so. The opening professor who spoke, I found a lot of her explanations quite helpful. Generative AI and how these things are put together, and what do you do with descriptors like red apple with a stem, right? And she had pictures of, well, what does that produce? Is it a red stem, a green stem, et cetera?
Yeah, machine learning versus deep learning versus, I mean, it was definitely, it was really interesting. I think it's important that we get that education too, because we kind of have to know what we're talking about it before we start.
You can legislate on it, exactly, right?
So,
and when somebody uses the phrase artificial intelligence, does it mean the same thing to you as it does to me, and vice versa?
Exactly.
Right.
So, I think it'll be interesting. That'll be definitely a topic. I'm new to the Privacy Committee this year, so I'm excited to be a part of those conversations because I think they're.
Well, you guys are on
the
men and women of the committee are on the cutting edge, and the EU is a little bit ahead, but certainly the other 49 states are going to look at California as well. So this is a truly emerging area of the law. You can always do stuff in labor and education and healthcare, right? Those are perennial issues, but privacy and AI is relatively new.
Definitely.
And you're right on the cutting edge of developing laws in that area.
Well, it's new, and like even the tech sector really, right, is figuring it out.
Sure. Oh, of course.
I mean, we saw that problematic launch of Gemini a couple weeks ago, where their new AI system was just doing a lot of weird things, and I think that there's just so many unknowns in this space, whether it's on the business side, whether it's on the government side.
Yeah.
And, as always, an opportunity to do a lot of good,
right?
But also an opportunity to do harm, right?
Exactly.
In new ways that we have to be aware of and willing to adjust for.
So. Well, I think with one last college age child, you can see lots of benefits, but at the same time, you also don't want, for example, a student to have his or her paper written by artificial intelligence, et cetera, right? So use it as a benefit, but not substitute it for learning, et cetera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was talking to a colleague of mine actually who in the assembly who used to be a teacher and
Yeah.
said near the end of his time as a teacher, he started getting some papers
Really.
written, this way. And
And he could definitely discern
I
the
think at the
difference.
time, like it was just kind of like it wasn't something that anyone was really aware of yet, right?
Okay. Yeah.
But he was telling me that his colleagues that he talks to in education
Yeah.
that they can write a B plus paper, like I mean, like, and you wouldn't,
That's better than passing. Yeah.
and it's very different than the plagiarism, like the plagiarizing issues because it's you're technically creating it, but you're not creating it, so
Right.
it's not gonna necessarily catch on a plagiarism filter. But but it's gonna write a B plus quality paper. Like,
Yeah.
it's a new challenge for teachers and for education for sure. So
Definitely. Yeah.
it'll be really
Yeah.
interesting.
That's a fascinating topic. Yeah.
So let's recap the week a little bit. Obviously, we're coming. This is a Wednesday here. This episode will come out probably Friday of this week, but we're coming in hot off the presses of the primary election last night.
Yeah.
We're not an election show, so we're not going to do a deep dive, but certainly some interesting results in the Assembly and the Senate races and the federal races. But my few, I guess, 3 takeaways would be turnout was incredibly low.
Sure.
My team is projecting 30 to 40%. I think Politico today was guessing like a third, so about 33%.
Yeah.
So we'll see, statewide what it ends up being. Obviously, that's going to vary by community too. So
Yeah.
kind of depends, but that's probably vastly different than what we're going to see in November. So that's an
Agreed.
interesting
Yeah.
takeaway. Prop 1, the governor's big mental health bond that he's been pushing really hard, that early polls showed was gonna
Yeah.
fly through, is I think
Was
still
leading by double digits.
Yep.
Yeah.
still too close to call.
Right.
I think that could still go either way, so we'll see
Yeah.
as the ballots continue to come in. And then the other one was just voters in large cities and some of the things they voted for. So in San Francisco, you saw the voters approve measures to increase police authority to go after criminals. You saw
Yes.
them pass a measure to require drug screenings for welfare recipients.
Yeah.
And in LA, you saw their DA get about 21% of the vote. Did advance to the top 2, kind of this embattled DA down there. And so really these voters in these urban areas are really starting to move in a different direction, I think, in reaction to a lot of the crime and the concerns that are going on there. But anyway, I'm editorializing, but I was curious if you had
Yeah.
any takeaways.
Well, certainly on a statewide basis, I guess I was a little bit surprised how far down in the numbers as of precinct reporting early this morning. Katie Porter and Barbara Lee were down. I wasn't surprised that the top 2 are Schiff and Garvey, but
Right.
I thought 3 and 4 would be a little closer.
Interesting.
It's not even 51-49 on Prop 1. That could change. I mean, an enormous amount was spent. The governor actively campaigned. A lot of the business community actively campaigned for it. So I'm surprised.
And there was really no opposition campaign either.
No, I think
that was very visible.
one political report said that they had $14,000 or something in their account to the millions in favor. There are a few assembly races that second party, we'll see what happens, who might actually make it. I think all of your assembly colleagues who are running for state senate seem to be poised for victory in November.
Yeah.
But some of them who were running for Congress or a local office aren't so far faring as well.
Yeah, didn't do as well.
We'll see what ultimately happens when all the votes are counted. But at least as of this morning, it wasn't looking too good for a handful.
Interesting. Yeah, and in California now, with these the way we do elections, it takes a long time to count these ballots, and
yes,
it is. I think frustrating sometimes to have to wait, but it is important to point out that it's going to be a while before
Yeah, and
all these ballots are counted.
as you know, the Secretary of State certifies the elections roughly 30 days after.
Yeah.
So some of them go down to the wire.
Right.
A year and a half ago, an individual who thought that they had won an assembly seat actually went through some of the member training even.
Yep.
And then ultimately lost, weeks
Yeah.
after the election. So
I remember that.
you have to be, careful. And this has happened on both sides with a Democrat and Republican in my recent memory. So you can't get too far out there. No, you can't jump the gun. And unfortunately, it also feeds into some notions of is there some sort of funny business going on? Why is it taking so long, et cetera? And so I know for a lot of the public and the electorate, I think that having those delays becomes problematic. Unfortunately, it shouldn't.
Yeah.
But it occasionally does.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, on that topic, in terms of just staying on the election, there was an interesting piece written last week in Capital Weekly by Stephen Maviglio.
Yes, I saw that.
Questioning and asking, basically for reconsideration of top two. How do you feel? What do you think on that topic? Because I know everyone has a different opinion, but it's like, do you think the top two, which is, I guess, been in, is what the voters approved, I guess, about 10 years ago now?
More than that.
Or I guess
it was
more
part
than
of
that
a
now,
budget deal before
Oh, that's right.
Prop 25
That's right.
moved us to a majority vote.
Right.
In 2010.
So it's been 14 years then.
Yeah, it's been quite some time. I think that the way it was pitched to everyone is that this would moderate legislators, both Democrat and Republican.
Right.
I don't think we've seen that. I think many Republicans are as conservative or to the far right, and I think plenty of Democrats are progressive or far to the left.
Right.
So I haven't really seen much of the alleged benefit of it about moderating, because the idea is that everybody can vote for everybody, and therefore you have to speak broadly to the electorate, not just those in your party, D or R, right? And I have not seen that really happen.
It was interesting in theory, but in practice, it just hasn't really panned out that way. And in a lot of cases, what we've seen instead is just a lot of gamesmanship, And, I mean, I think in this cycle, most noticeably was probably Adam Schiff boosting Steve Garvey.
Yes.
Right. On all of his mailers. I mean, So I think, you're seeing the political consultants in the political world kind of play games more, or use top two as a way to kind of get their preferred scenario. Not that it always works.
Right.
But certainly, I think it's become a little more confusing for voters in a lot of ways. I love talking to people that aren't necessarily politicos, right?
Yeah.
About these mailers that they get, or, the ads that they see. And they're like, I got this ad, and, let's say you're talking to a Republican and it says, this guy is too conservative. Well, that's what I want.
Right.
And then, but it's sent by the other guy, but they don't know that. It's like the way that they see it is like, wait a second, why would they send that to me?
Yeah.
And it's really.
Well, I heard an interesting suggestion actually on Monday, which was maybe top two combined with no party affiliation is allowed on the ballot.
When you say, you mean for anybody? So nobody is labeled.
Correct.
Yeah. Interesting.
What would be the, now there, as you are probably familiar, there are many voters out there who go R down the line or D down the line, right? And so it would definitely force, in theory, it would force voters to educate themselves more on those individual candidates, but they'll still get inundated with the mailers.
Yeah.
But It was an interesting thought.
It's an interesting idea. I mean, that's how it works at the local level, right?
Right, of
Most
course.
at least in my community, most of the local
Yeah,
races
all
are
local,
nonpartisan.
judicial, and of course, our state superintendent of
Hmm.
public instruction by law. Those are
Sure,
nonpartisan
nonpartisan. Yeah.
offices. Yeah.
Yeah. So, oh, interesting. So,
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see what happens on
Yeah.
that. Moving on, Dan Walters, I want to chat a little bit about homelessness. So, Dan
Hmm.
Walters wrote a great piece actually on something I've been working on, which
Okay.
is an audit of homelessness spending,
Sure.
and basically kind of reiterated what I've been saying for a long time, which is, that we're spending billions of dollars on
Of
homelessness. We're
course.
seeing homelessness continue to increase. I think the numbers are around 20 billion in the last 5 years, with an
Right.
increase statewide, at least according to the latest federal data, of about 32% statewide in homelessness.
Yeah.
If
We
you
have the
live
largest,
Yeah.
California has the largest population
Yep.
of homeless individuals. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it's about, I think, we're home to now almost 50%, but 49% of the nation's unsheltered homeless population
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
which is pretty astounding to think
Yes.
about. And, you know, I think a lot of people are wondering, what are we doing wrong? And so, anyway, I just wanted to touch on it, just mostly to give people an update that my audit of homelessness spending, which he mentions and writes about here,
Yeah.
and we'll put it in the show docs if anyone wants to read the article, but it is due back in early spring, so I'm excited to see the results of that. But I thought it was really interesting. There was a local audit done in the city of Sacramento recently,
Okay.
and that he cites here, that he's really concerned about the bang for the buck,
Yeah.
right?
Of
The
course.
dollars that we're
Right.
spending, what are
What's
we
the
actually
ROI?
getting, right?
Yeah.
The ROI, what are these investments actually getting us? So, as the city of Sac faces a $66 million budget deficit, they spent $57 million on homelessness during 22-23 fiscal year,
Hmm.
$34 million on maintaining 1,300 beds of temporary shelter,
Yep.
which equates to about $26,000 per bed, or $2,000 per month, which equals about an apartment, to money to rent an apartment
Sure.
essentially.
Yeah.
And so the ROI really is, I think, a concern. And so hoping that
Yeah.
that audit shows some of the ways we can fix
Well,
this.
it's interesting. Most friends and family are not involved in politics in any way, but the two questions I get most often are,
Yep.
where's all that homelessness money being spent?
Yep.
Because I keep seeing people on the street.
Yeah.
And the second question is how did we go from a massive budget surplus to a massive budget deficit? Those are the
Yeah.
two, almost exclusively,
Yep.
the only two questions I ever get when somebody asks me about what's going on in Sacramento.
Yeah. I mean, I would say homelessness, roads, and crime is what I hear about most in the district.
Yeah, I can see that.
And this budget fluctuation as well is just
Yeah.
particularly bad in California
Yeah.
because of how we structure our
We have
tax
one of the most
system.
progressive tax systems in the
Yeah.
nation, for good or for bad. But
Yeah,
this is one of the
exactly.
outcomes of it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I know
So,
that the legislature, certainly the folks who helped develop Prop 2, our so-called rainy day fund, have
Mhm.
taken a lot of pride with that it
Yeah.
has tried to smooth things over.
sure.
But as the governor noted in his Jan 10 release, it is capped at 10%
Mhm.
of the
Yep.
general fund, and he urged increasing it, and I completely concur.
Yeah, I would
We've
agree
got
with
to
that as
increase
well.
the amount. I mean, we're close to we dropped a little bit, but we're still close to about $300 billion budget,
Yep.
so we've got to increase that amount by
Yeah.
more than, well above 10%. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that would be really smart. If you live too on the homelessness thing, if you
Yeah.
live in an urban city, or in an urban area or a large city, we've seen maybe homelessness statewide go up 30 something percent. But if you live in a big city, it's a lot more than that too. Is
Well,
the other thing,
unfortunately, as you
so,
know, working downtown
yeah.
Sacramento, there is not a day I don't pass somebody right here on L Street or close to the Capitol or
Yep.
the other government buildings here in downtown Sacramento, and certainly along K Street. And it's a
Yeah.
it's a sad commentary on our city that we can't address that homeless population, and many of whom obviously have mental health needs as well. So
Yeah,
I'd like to
for
see
sure.
those folks taken care of,
Yeah.
by our society. I mean, that's a good, whether it's schools, roads, but, healthcare and
Yeah.
ensuring that people in our society today are not, in fact, homeless. That's money that should be well spent. And unfortunately, we're not seeing much of it at this stage as to it
Yeah.
actually impacting the problem.
Yeah. And I think, getting to those root causes too, those mental health challenges or substance abuse treatment, I mean,
hmm
has to be a larger part of the equation. Because I think at this point, a lot of the focus is always put on, housing, which I think obviously is important. Shelter is
Sure.
important. We have to make sure people work their way to permanent housing. That's the goal. You can't necessarily do that unless you kind of address some of these underlying issues as well. So,
Well, there's, probably middle-aged woman who sits down here right outside this building
yeah,
pretty much every day,
yep,
um, and talking to herself and,
yeah,
is obviously unhoused,
sure,
so, how does society help someone like that?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Shifting gears a little bit, I
Yeah.
wanted to throw a question to you about the
Okay.
EV market
Oh,
or the EV, I guess, struggles of late. So there were three kind of bigger stories over the last week about three major EV companies slash projects.
yeah.
The first was Rivian, which
Sure.
was this kind of like up and coming EV
Yeah.
automaker. And actually, if
You
you've
see
seen
some of their
if you've
vehicles on
seen their
the
vehicles, they're really cool
Yeah,
looking.
yeah, yeah.
Kind of different, but I find them pretty neat. They announced a 10% cut in their workforce. I
Right.
think their stock dropped about 25%,
Yeah.
largely off of lowering demand for
Sure.
EVs. They're
Yeah.
also having trouble making money. Their cars have a really high price point. So, they've been struggling. Fisker also, which is another EV maker, also
Yep.
announced a workforce cut.
Yep.
And then, the third kind of big story that I actually found really interesting was Apple came out and announced that they're canceling Project Titan,
Exactly.
which is this EV. They were trying to build an autonomous EV.
Yeah.
Now that's a little bit different than their traditional EV market,
Sure.
probably, but
Right.
they spent, I think, like billions of
Yeah.
dollars,
Yeah.
investing over the last many years into this program and creating this vehicle, and now they're just scrapping it entirely.
Yeah.
What do you think the future of EVs is in California? Obviously, the governor and a number of people are,
Sure.
really banking on EV technology, but
Yeah.
I think it's hitting a speed bump, if I may use a a
Yes.
driving pun.
Yeah. Well, I still think that that's probably the end result, whether it's done by statute regulation, right? I mean, the
Yeah,
governor wants to phase all gas-powered vehicles off the road entirely at a specified time, et cetera. I mean, it's undoubtedly the future, but I think obviously you're dealing with two major issues. One is,
yeah,
as you said, the price point,
yep,
right? Even with federal tax credits and all, they're very expensive for anyone to purchase.
yeah,
And secondly, I think there's a lot of, anxiety about those who drive them because of the lack of, infrastructure, right? You can find gas stations all over the place, if you will.
sure,
I was finished work one day a couple of weeks ago here downtown, and I was walking towards my car in the parking garage, and this gentleman came and he said, "I need your help." And I said, "What can I help you with?" And he said, "Where's the nearest EV charging station?" And I said, "Sorry, sir, I don't drive an electric vehicle. I have no idea."
he had that
But he
charge
was
panic.
exactly, but he was like close to the end, and he was out of his car walking because he didn't want to keep driving around to find something.
Wow. Yeah.
But I know that with a lot of friends and family, that is of concern that, for example, how often if they take a long trip through the Central Valley or down to Southern California, how often will they have to stop? And those who use them, I'm shocked at the number of people who have said where they've arrived, there's long lines and a wait, or that a number of the charging stations are not working.
Yeah.
So,
and that is a real problem.
Yeah, one of your colleagues in the assembly was telling me of a few weeks ago when he was driving around the Bay Area trying to find one. Once he found one that was available, that was working, he said he waited almost an hour to charge, and then he sat and waited for an hour to charge in order to get home.
Yeah.
I think that sort of thing gives pause to anyone who is on the fence whether or not they should buy yet. So I think most people have the mindset that eventually 10 years, 25 years, we will get there.
Yeah.
But a lot of stuff has to happen, reduction in price, and that you can find charging basically at every block, if you will.
Yeah, it's certainly the infrastructure is a huge key to, the EV market. I mean, but it's not even, the thing is, the broken chargers are a huge problem.
Yeah.
I drive an EV as well, and I will say that I can attest to that as well. But, I think the bigger challenge that really the EV folks don't even control, or even the charging people don't control, is even if you could tomorrow, unveil all these charging stations, that we don't really have the grid, capacity for it, right? And so sometimes
it's a little bit of the untold story.
Exactly, right? So sometimes like the barrier, right, is not necessarily, companies not wanting to install more charging. It's you can't get them hooked up. I mean, you have to deal with your utility, and the utilities are saying, we can't, or it's going to be a while, or, we don't have the
do we
capacity.
Import more power from out of state?
Yeah.
Do we, reinvigorate the nuclear industry? The governor and legislature a few years ago decided to postpone the closing of Diablo Canyon Power Plant, right?
Yep.
To ensure that, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10% of the electricity produced in the state by that power plant remains on the grid until we can at least find a replacement, if not keep it on permanently. That'll be interesting to see.
Well, I think nuclear has to be part of the solution. There's other countries that are relying heavily on it, and it's clean power. It's power that's very reliable. One of the challenges with a lot of green energy, right, is solar goes off at some point, right? Wind doesn't always blow. But with nuclear, it's a very reliable source of clean energy. And I mean, that's really, when you talk to, utilities or energy experts, that's what we need.
Yes.
Is you need those peak time, or, the peaks and valleys of the energy market. You need those reliable sources.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see. I think that this will be a temporary lull. I think most people, if you're, let's say, a 2-car household and you live in a single family home, I think most of that demographic probably today could buy an EV and be fine. From the standpoint, not necessarily affordability wise, but from the standpoint of logistics. You install a home charging station.
Yes.
You have one EV in your car that's for your city driving, or in your garage it's for your city driving, and then you have a gas car or some other hybrid or whatever you want to drive for your long distance trips with your family or whatever. To me, that is a easy thing to do today. But anyone outside that category, multifamily housing, or someone that can't afford a home charger, or a house, right, or is maybe renting, it's a little more challenging, right? So it's
you have a whole segment of today's population that's entirely dependent on public transportation. They can't buy any vehicle, gas, let alone electric, right? I don't remember. I haven't looked at the figure in quite some time, but I thought the last time I saw it that the average price of a vehicle, used and new in this state, was somewhere in like the low $20,000 range. And obviously EVs are not there.
Right.
So
Yeah.
What can the average person really afford, even
Yeah.
with federal and or state
Yeah.
subsidies?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a couple EVs in that range, but it's it's
Yeah.
definitely not a lot.
Yeah.
So not a
Yeah.
lot of choices
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah.
Shifting gears,
Okay.
so I feel like I always talk about San Francisco on this podcast, but you may have heard that they announced that the Union Square Macy's is going to be closing.
Yes, very sad.
I mean, this is one of the most iconic stores, right, in San
What
Francisco.
Sacramentan has not shopped at Union Square, or at least window shopped during the
Yeah,
holidays?
seen
Yeah.
it during Christmas. I mean, this one really, I think, hits home for a lot of San Franciscans.
Yes.
Some of the local electeds in that area are trying to spin it as, well, this is just part of a larger Macy's closure.
Well, they did announce 120,
Yeah, they are
150
closing other
closures
Macy's.
across the country. So yes.
But I thought it was really interesting. I found this statistic. So 16% of product stolen from Macy's Union Square in 2023.
Yeah.
That's the highest shrinkage level of any Macy's in the United States. And acceptable shrinkage is less than 1%.
1%. Sure.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
right.
If you're dealing with a 16%
shrinkage, meaning the retailer has lost it
exactly.
without
correct
payment.
Yes. So shrinkage being that is good to define that term.
Yeah, right.
The merchandise has gone out the door,
right?
But you have not received any compensation.
It has been taken without commensurate payment.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. That's a huge shrinkage rate. I mean,
of course,
if you were Macy's and you were looking at what stores do we close in the United States, you're probably going to close the one with a 16% shrinkage rate, right?
Yes.
Versus one with a 0.8% shrinkage rate in some other community.
It may not be the sole factor, but it definitely has to put it high up on the target list.
I mean, sure, right?
Yeah.
I mean, why wouldn't it? And so, but I was just fascinated by that statistic that that is just, it's hard to operate a business when you're losing 16% of your product.
Well, as you know, a lot of businesses, from small restaurants to small retail establishment, if you will, not the Macy's of the world, but many of those have single-digit profit margins.
Yeah.
It's just like what is the ultimate cost of minimum wages increases? Yeah. They probably should be increased in this state, but that money has to come from somewhere. And so you've got to pay for it on the back end or through, increases in the price of service or goods, et cetera.
Right.
The Macy's of the world, they can't sustain a 16% shrinkage factor, right? I mean, if they do, they're going to have to raise the price of everything else. I also find it sad, just in my local CVS and Walgreens, you walk in and they have certain products that are under lock and key.
Yeah.
Or behind the retail employees who are working there to ring you up. Some things you can only get that are behind them, right?
Yeah.
And not accessible to somebody walking in and running off. Yeah.
I just lost my neighborhood Walgreens in Folsom.
Really?
Yeah. Shut down.
That's crazy.
Which, Folsom's not San Francisco.
Well, and it's a greatly growing
it's a
area
growing
of
community.
suburb of Sacramento.
But they left town, and it's literally down the street from my house. It's a huge, honestly, personally, my wife and I were like, this is awful. That's where we do our 11 p.m. runs to get kids medicine.
I was just going to say, what parent hasn't run out at 11 o'clock for cold medicine, diapers, whatever it is?
Something, right? Yeah. So this has impacts on communities,
right? Of course it does.
I mean, I'm sure Macy's does too, right?
Yeah.
So, but these local Walgreens, CVS, I mean, those are really important stores for a lot of communities.
Oh, a lot of people. Well, and today, of course, many of them sell, just some minimal, you can get a gallon of milk or orange juice or a box of cereal and other things, right? I mean, it's not a full-fledged grocery store, but when you run out of milk late at night or first thing in the morning and the grocery store isn't open, or in your case, it might be a few miles away as opposed to around the corner.
Yeah, exactly.
People will run up to Walgreens and get those few items.
No, it's a bummer to see for sure.
Yeah. Well,
And
retail theft obviously is a very hot topic.
yeah,
Speaker Rivas created that select committee that your colleague, Assemblyman
yeah,
Zabur, is chairing. The new pro tem has
yeah,
obviously put together a package with his colleagues, a bipartisan one he announced the
yeah,
other week.
yeah.
Clearly it's a hot topic.
Well, since we're on this topic, so
Okay.
the pro tem
Yeah.
said last week I was going to bring this up later, but we're here. So
Okay.
Senator McGuire said, "I do not believe our state needs to touch Prop 47 in order to make our community safer."
Mm-hmm.
That is in quite contrast to a lot of the folks pushing this current initiative to change Prop 47. I mean, I feel like we do need to touch Prop 47, but I thought that was kind of interesting that him and the speaker have really put that out
Well,
there.
I was going to say the Assembly Democratic leadership package also does not propose amending
Right.
47.
Right.
And don't forget, amending 47 requires a vote of the people.
Right.
If you're going to make some of the proposed changes.
Sure.
Now, there's obviously an initiative to
Yeah.
place it before the voters. So perhaps these purely statutory changes through legislation will occur,
Yeah.
and then the voters will decide whether or not to
Yeah.
modify or keep Prop 47 intact as it is. So, to some degree, I can appreciate, I guess it's open to debate whether or not 47 has to be modified, but
Yeah.
I think the legislature could, in fact, enact multiple bills
Yeah.
to attempt to address the problem of retail theft without amending 47 by legislation, and then letting the people decide if that ballot measure gets
Right.
the requisite number of signatures from the DA's association and others.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think it's interesting because the legislature is very focused on the organized retail theft statute, which when you talk to DAs is not a very useful statute. They don't use it almost ever.
Right.
And so, what most of the DAs I've spoken to have said is, no, we need changes to Prop 47 so that we can fully carry out our jobs in, holding criminals accountable and things
Yeah.
like that. But, kind of this, I feel like the legislature, and again, not that they're bad bills that the
Yeah.
legislature is attempting to push, but they're not necessarily going to fix the problem if they only stay in the organized retail theft category.
Sure.
Because a lot of the problems that we're having, the 16% shrinkage rate, some of that might have been organized retail theft, but I bet a lot of it wasn't.
No,
Right?
it was last fall where I saw something that my very first time we were in line at the Bel Airs near my in-laws, and my wife and I were standing in line. They were ringing us up, and one of the clerks went running out the door, and we all sort of looked. And when you looked in the parking lot, right there in front, there was a car with
Yeah.
the engine running, and this person had a full grocery shopping cart, and they were throwing the items in the cart into the back seat of this waiting vehicle.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
the store clerk came out and grabbed the shopping carts and pulled it away. And the person grabbed like the last handful, threw it in, and jumped into their car, and screeching tires, and off they went. I mean,
Wow.
it was
Yeah.
it was the first time I had seen it actually happen in person. That clearly was not an organized theft ring.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it was two individuals
Sure.
who, grabbed what they could get, and off they went.
Yeah.
Um,
When I think a lot of the small businesses being impacted by retail theft, it's stuff like that.
yeah, it's the
Right? It's
I'll
not-
call it the
it's not
one-off,
organized. Yeah.
the
yeah.
one-off type thing. But
But it's still
it's
painful.
well, and those are
Yeah.
shrinkage
Yeah.
for Bel Air, right? They just
Oh,
lost
for sure. Yeah.
$100 or more
Right.
worth of items, from
Yeah.
groceries to other items that they have there.
Yeah. No, it's the switching to the
Okay.
topic of fentanyl. So the governor put out a release last week.
Mhm.
California National Guard has seized 60, or this was for 2023. Last year seized over 62,000 pounds
Yes.
of fentanyl in 2023, which is a 1,066% increase
increase.
over 2021.
I thought the most fascinating statistic, actually, those
Yeah.
62,000 pounds,
Yeah.
said that it would kill every person on Earth twice.
Incredible. And that's just California.
And that's just California. And
Yeah.
that was what was seized. Obviously, there is a lot out there that's not seized.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, I think this is sort of like retail theft, human trafficking bill that was dealt with last year.
Yeah.
I think that, depending on your point of view, there's clearly two ideologies. In the most simplistic terms, one is a kind of a lock them up, punish the wrongdoer, send them to jail for a very long time, and others who, whether it's the war on drugs or others that don't see value in the lock them up and throw away the key, that we have to do early intervention, that we have to rehabilitate those in prison, et cetera. And I think that is the tension that is playing out in the legislature. There are folks who want to increase penalties against fentanyl dealers.
Yep.
And there are others who say just locking them up isn't going to stop the flow of those drugs to our youth, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so I obviously don't have the silver bullet, but I mean, I think that's the tension that's currently going on.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think, I hope we do more on fentanyl this year. I am more on this, obviously on the side of increasing penalties. But just when you look at, I hope that we're able to talk about this in this context, which is that it is a growing problem and is going to continue to grow.
Yeah.
5,000 pounds in 2021, 28 in 2022, and 62 in 2023. I mean, that is astronomical increases.
Yeah.
And this is now, his press release actually has a street value here. So $649 million street value of that fentanyl that was seized. Wow. And again, to your point, that's just what was seized. We don't even
know is what was seized.
We don't know how much got in that wasn't seized. So, I think we have to tackle this issue. I think it's really important. And, it's important for, obviously, I've got some legislation, but there's a number of folks in the legislature with legislation. Mine is geared specifically towards targeting of minors with fentanyl.
Okay.
And cracking down on that. San Francisco DA and London Breed, the mayor Breed, announced that it is actually shifting its approach in San Francisco. So there have been some more conservative county DAs that have started pursuing murder charges for fentanyl.
Yep.
When it results in a death, and have been successful. Placer County being, I think, the first one or one of the first ones. San Francisco announced last week they're going to start doing that too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's pretty telling when you have DAs from across the political spectrum really getting on board with this. So,
well, I think that could be one aspect of it, but that doesn't guarantee that it's going to be off the streets just because somebody might be prosecuted for murder. I mean, I remember years ago when somebody pointed out that there are several countries out there that, have the death penalty for drug trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
And there are still drug traffickers in those,
Sure.
you can.
You can raise it as,
you can create the ultimate punishment and it's not going to guarantee, but, clearly it is a problem and more people are dying.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the sad thing, especially our youth.
Yep.
Either not understanding how deadly fentanyl can be, or that they're being given it, somehow. But whatever the point, education has to be a part of it. Enhanced punishment for those who know what they're doing.
Yep.
But it's going to, again, there's no silver bullet to these problems. Yeah.
Wanted to touch on this really briefly.
Okay.
New report released last week by the Pacific Institute determined that, it's 59.5 million acre feet of stormwater go uncaptured in the United States every year.
Sure.
There's the California numbers in here somewhere. It's of the 10 states with the most untapped potential, California ranks 9th
Yeah.
with approximately 2.27 million acre feet of urban area runoff each year.
Yeah.
To put that in context, an acre foot is about 326,000 gallons, which is enough water to supply about 3 homes. So you multiply 3 homes by 2.27 million.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a
We
big,
have a
that's
lot
a lot
of
of water.
runoff in this state.
It's
Yes.
a lot of water. So
Well, and isn't that, we're happy in a way that this past weekend we had record snowfall
yep.
right in the Sierras because it's that runoff in the spring that supplies everything for the rest of the year. I think this is definitely an area where California has to do more in ensuring that we store and prevent the amount of runoff. Again, like anything else, we're not going to prevent every last drop of water from running off, but the more we can do, hopefully it, limits the degree of drought that we have in some very bad years. And that's part of the cycle. Whether you believe in climate change or not, we have the cyclical nature of drought and rain and drought and rain. And, it's sort of like at the beginning of our chat about the cyclical nature of our revenues, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to even things out. It's the same thing here. In the good time, hold on to some of it. So in the bad time, when we lack enough sufficient water for farms and people, we have it stored up type thing.
So big story over the last week, the biggest story, right?
What is it?
What was it? Can you guess?
What was it? Oh,
Panera
PaneraGate.
bread.
Oh, okay.
PaneraGate.
Yeah, whatever
they're calling it now. Want to get your take on it, obviously, for the people that haven't heard about it, although it's been kind of everywhere. There was a minimum wage law passed by the legislature last year. I personally opposed it, but it was passed by the legislature. It was signed by the governor, went into law to increase fast food wages to $20 an hour. Within that bill was a provision that basically exempted a company from this minimum wage law that bakes bread on the premises and sells it as a standalone item. Important caveat to that, in case McDonald's decided tomorrow to start baking bread, it actually said you had to do that before September 15th, 2023. So it was very specific to, a certain type of business, now being decried, I guess, as a carve out or exemption for Panera Bread, whose CEO happens to be a donor of Gavin Newsom. So I'm assuming you've heard the story.
I've heard
but
the
just
story.
to set the stage for it, what I wanted to play for you real quick. So we're gonna make this our clip of the week, but I wanted to get your thoughts on this part specifically. But the author of the bill was kind of caught off the floor by the press and had some comments.
Oh, I didn't see
on
that.
it, and you haven't seen that.
No,
oh, perfect.
I haven't.
All right, so we'll play it and then we'll get your thoughts.
No. In terms of, I inherited the bill, so the fundamentals of the bill were in place when I took the bill over, and those issues that were addressed and brought out by my colleagues in the Assembly, we focused on those issues moving forward when we went to the Senate, and as we addressed the issues that we were concerned to them, whether it's under liability or any other things that they brought out around the bill, but that was not one that they were.
Assemblyman, but respectfully, when you took over the bill, the exemption was not in there. The exemption was placed in the bill in the final weeks of the legislative session when you were carrying it. So were you part of the negotiation to include that exemption?
I was not.
You weren't, but it was your bill. So
Yes.
how are you not included in the negotiation?
In terms of, it's my bill, but in terms of the negotiations, it was bringing together the business community and the franchisees and the franchisors, and also SEIU and others, and through the governor's leadership, they came together, and what came out of that is what became the amendments to the bill.
So you've been involved in a lot of negotiations, I assume. So, but I did find it interesting, right? And I pretty new as a legislator in Sacramento, but I'm generally pretty aware of what's going on with my bill negotiations. I understand most of my bills aren't negotiated on the level that this one probably was. But everyone right now is kind of just deflecting blame and like, well, I didn't know it was in there, and I didn't know it was in there, and I wasn't involved in this conversation. So I don't know. I was just curious what your thoughts were in general on bill negotiations and how this kind of thing could happen.
Well, first of all, I think that there are different levels of negotiations. I mean, sometimes they're over a word or two, and sometimes they are to remove opposition and make an interest group neutral, for example. Sometimes it's in order to engender support for something, but it can vary. I think 1228 that Mr. Holden is the author of, for whom I have tremendous respect. I think that, this is you got to place this bill in a much larger context. Remember his bill the prior year, AB 257, was opponents had gathered a sufficient number of signatures to place a referendum before the voters, right? That would have normally been on the November 2024 ballot. And so they were coming back around a second time, from my understanding, and I was not personally involved in this bill. To my understanding is that the administration as well stepped in to help negotiate something, because you had their broader implications. This wasn't a standalone bill. This was also part of a statewide ballot measure, i.e. that referendum. Right. And so I think that there were a lot of not only third-party interest groups, right, for and against it, but you had the interest of legislators in both houses, the administration, et cetera. So I think that there were undoubtedly lots of hands in the pot, so to speak. I know it might not sound good to the average voter or citizen out there, but I think from time to time, legislators do, in fact, allow the folks who are directly affected by a bill to negotiate the actual words, with the understanding that, A, it's subject to public review, and of course, ultimately a vote by 80 members of the Assembly, 40 of the Senate, and governor's signature or veto, right? So there are lots of reviewing eyes after. But when you have interest groups that know and understand the industry or the issues at play in that bill, again, it may not sound great to the to an average citizen, but in the legislative process here in California, the other 49 states, certainly at the federal level in Congress, you do in fact sometimes say, okay, warring factions, proponents and opponents, go work it out. Come back to us with a finished product. Part of the problem here is that you have a very high profile issue, again, subject to a referendum. Fast food restaurants, minimum wage, $20 is a big hike. It's currently $16, right, across the board for everybody. And so I can appreciate the concern that an average reader, viewer, citizen might have. I don't think that it is that unique in terms of how the legislative process works. And frankly, why wouldn't you want, again, legislators ultimately have a vote.
Right.
So they can say those interest groups for and against who came together and worked out every last word, thank you so much. I think it's crap.
Exactly.
And vote against it. Well, no, it's sort of like how often from time to time, not always, but from time to time, a judge will reject a plea agreement. Or things. Well, it's great that the prosecution and the defense worked this out, but it doesn't fly with me. I
still don't like it,
Well, ultimately, legislators are in the position to say, thank you for all, maybe months, maybe years of negotiations. Thank you so much. I think this is a terrible bill.
And that's all right. That's what I decided to do.
Of course.
To be honest with you, I do get the value of, let's say, for example, in this case, the fast food businesses being at the table. Because if you're not at the table, you're on the table, as the old saying goes, right? But it's important that everyone, including every side that's impacted, has a voice in the process, and then voters ultimately vote on it. My big I think, concerned with the bill itself, just the actual impact of the legislation itself, is that, what I'm hearing from a lot of my local business owners, particularly in the food industry, is that, we're raising $20 minimum wage on fast food, but now all the jobs, all the workers are starting to gravitate that direction.
Sure.
And so it almost by default, requires other industries or other types of restaurants, even the ones like Panera Bread, which, by the way, just announced it's going to do this anyway, to raise their wages as well, because they have to compete for workers.
Yes.
And so I think it was clever, although frustrating, that the proponents of this minimum wage increase are talking like, oh, this only affects fast food. We're just focused on fast food. Well, sure. That may be the case with the text of the bill, but the reality of the bill is that it's going to force everyone to kind of come up.
Well, the minimum wage itself has broader implications as well. So even in the fast food industry, this is the issue of non-exempt or exempt employees.
Yep.
There are two tests, one of which is a wage aspect, a wage test in which you have to be a certain amount above the minimum wage. Otherwise, even if you're a salaried worker, you will have to be paid overtime. So there are implications in the job market, right? An industry that pays a higher wage may naturally attract more people. Don't forget, they may posit, but last year in SB 525, the governor signed a bill to increase the minimum wage for healthcare facility workers.
Yep, remember.
Up to $25 per hour.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's slated down the road to take effect. They may push that off a year or multiple years. But nonetheless, will that drive lots of people into the healthcare workspace?
Yeah.
But also, as you said, will it cause other people, other industries, other businesses to raise their rates to try to hold on to workers so that they don't go to the fast food industry or to the healthcare workforce?
Right. Yeah, well, and he's kind of running from that in the budget even. I think the budget negotiations, the governor is trying to delay that implementation because it's going to cost the state
several billion dollars. $4 billion, as I recall, in the budget. It's significant. Look, folks can agree or disagree whether or not those wage increases are justified. But as I said earlier, they have to get paid for. Right.
Yeah,
so fast food is going to raise its rate. I remember years ago in one of the last minimum wage bill that went through under Governor Brown, it was SB 3 by then Senator Mark Leno from San Francisco. And, part of the debate and the discussion was, what are the implications of it? How does it impact, different industries, et cetera? And, that one was across the board. Now, I think a lot of folks in the business community wanted to see more off-ramps because ultimately 15, and now there's, due to the CPI, it's gone up to 16 on January 1. That's all under SB 3 existing law, and that's for everybody, right? No matter the size employer or the type of industry you're in. But folks pointed out, Del Norte County is different than Los Angeles County, right? Sacramento may be different than the Inland Empire, et cetera.
Yep.
Does the same minimum wage make sense across the board?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that selecting different industries for a different state mandated minimum wage makes sense. Just like I'm not sure it makes sense to have the same minimum wage up and down the state of California.
In San Francisco, as you do. In,
higher cost of living.
Fresno, as you do.
And by the way, that argues for maybe more than the 16 that is the minimum wage in San Francisco, but maybe it's still 12 somewhere else, right?
Yeah, it's totally true. I think the argument's generally oversimplified when we legislate on it statewide, especially in a state as diverse as California.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, though, it's important to have a reasonable minimum wage. I think that's a good worker protection.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, when you go too fast with it, I think it's really hard on businesses. It makes it really difficult to run a business.
Sure.
I think it's actually is going to have a negative impact on workers in a lot of cases because You're going to see a growth in automation, for example, in fast food industry, where you could see fewer jobs. And then ultimately, it's really hard on consumers because they're going to have to pay the costs of this. It's not always necessarily the business. It's going to oftentimes be the consumer. And, I've been talking to some of my local franchisees, and they're raising price of their fast food by 25+% in reaction to this legislation. So, who are we helping here, right? It's really
well. That
really
also means that the folks who unfortunately do work at a minimum wage in this state, they're also going to see the costs of goods and services go up as well. So query whether or not their increase covers.
You're making more, but now you're paying more. So are you actually coming out ahead?
Well, and I also thought it was telling. I remember hearkening again back to this SB3 debate years ago. I remember a restaurant owner testifying and saying, in essence, if I could get away with charging $15 for a hamburger, I would do it today.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Well, and that's the part that always gets left out of the argument, right? If businesses,
if the market allowed me, I would charge.
It.
The market only allows $4.99, or whatever it was.
If
then,
it cost me $2 to make a burger and I can sell it, I normally sell it for $5, but I could sell it for $10. You're gonna sell it for $10.
Most business people in our entrepreneurial United States is going to sell it for the $10, right? So yeah.
Yeah, it's a great point. Well, hey, on that we'll get you out of here. But did you have any final thoughts or closing arguments or no?
I mean, another busy year in the legislature, undoubtedly. I mean, we continue. Look, we face perennial issues like transportation funding and the pros and cons of our public education system and how we provide health care and the delivery mechanisms and all of that. So we always have perennial issues, but there'll be some interesting ones like on public safety, retail theft, fentanyl, and things like artificial intelligence. I think it makes the job that I love so much, as well as that of the elected members of the legislature and their staff who work in our state capitol. We really have a neat opportunity to be involved in addressing some of these issues that affect the public generally. So I enjoy it.
No, absolutely. And I say it all the time, but I am truly honored to be representing the community where I grew up and getting to be a voice for them in Sacramento. And it's, definitely nothing like it. So excited to get to work for this year.
Yeah.
If anyone has any ideas for future shows, you can email pointoforderpod@gmail.com. You can watch, subscribe, follow the podcast on all of the social media accounts: YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, at Point of Order Pod. You can follow today's hosts on X or Twitter at Joshua_Hoover for myself, or at Chris Micheli, Micheli is how you spell Micheli for Chris. He's a good follow, and he always tweets out some great statistics and some of the fun stuff.
That's the legislative geek in me.
That's right. Yeah, no, it's definitely a fun follow. So you can follow Chris on X. But Chris, thanks again for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me as a guest. I appreciate it.
All right. See you next
time.
Thank you, sir.